This is episode 10 of Radio Artists, a podcast by Studium Generale artists. Welcome to episode 10, also the final installment in our series on equality in the arts. If you've been listening along, I'm sure it has been a bumpy and at times terrifying ride. This episode is your recovery program, in which we round up what has been said and set our eyes on the future.
So how do we tie in these knots together? Hearing all of this, maybe ask one of you who wants to talk on that. What is something that you would take away from this day if you tie in all those things together? What would you do? What would be an insight today that you will use tomorrow, if you will? And I know it's a bit of a tough question. It's a reflective question of something that maybe you still want to churn on. I can understand that, but maybe Delphine, because you've been working on it already quite some time, and then it'll give you some time to. Maybe it'll give you some time to reflect, and then I'll come back to the rest of you. But Delphine.
Yeah, in regard to Reed Velsenberg, for instance, when you say working a long time on things, we curated a quite large-scale project in 2006 called Share the Story, Decolonizing the Image. And it was 2 exhibitions, a film program, a video launch with 40 artists filmed from all over the world, and a 3-day international conference. And it was a kind of first event of this kind, I believe, in the Netherlands. And there was not a single press article on the whole thing, which was already quite puzzling. But I got a call from the Studium Generale, from the Rietveld Academy, and say, "Oh, we realized we never addressed decolonization at the Rietveld. Would you be interested that we take over some of the conference program?" So we organized that year 72 conferences, 6 symposium, and I believe it was also the first time in the Netherlands in an art school that it happened. So seeing the work that you do now makes me really emotional, I have to say, but also happy. But it took 12 years.
Emotional
like
in a good way.
You know, it's like, why did it take so long? You know, this is, and so this is what I experienced. I've been teaching feminism and try to address some of the blind spot. And why am I emotional? Because it was pointed out by some of you. It's called the emotional labor. It is what is the cost of doing this work in precarious conditions as a freelance teacher hired. And then you bring that conversation, and when you're gone, that conversation is gone. And you repeat that in another institution. And how many times can you do this work? You know, and what's the right form for doing this work? Is it the right place for doing this work? And this is a question where I am now. So I stopped curating shows, I reduced my teaching, and I'm focusing on publishing and also organizing this kind of events, which for me, bringing this different perspective, voice, generation, are the most meaningful things that we can do. And also addressing trauma. I believe today in the Netherlands, there is not a Me Too moment because they are not a condition for a Me Too moment, because most institutions don't have in place policies that you could speak up in a safe space. And what's the cost, personally, to try to bring up these issues? You really highlighted this brilliantly in your presentation. You know, beyond what you lived, do you want to relive it again in the public eye if that's going to make you so unsafe and probably... Yeah. I do doctoral research on among others, revisiting the legacy of women artists that have been forgotten. And I get cyberbullied online for that research in 2019 in Europe by fellow from my field. How is that even possible? And everybody remains silent about this. So that cost of doing this work, of bringing each other here, we all have experienced what it means. So I think this is also, as an institution, there are some here, create safe space, bring care, bring love, give us the time, the money, the space for experimenting, maybe making mistakes, that we can continue this work. Be allies, that we can continue this work. This is for me really, really essential to make it possible.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Delphine. Yeah. That's Yeah, it's time for the handkerchiefs on the table. And they're there for you if you want to. Thank you for that. Which also shows the importance of intergenerational exchange and learning and teaching, and the reciprocity that goes with it is so important, because the fact, I mean, you're inspired because of Nagaré's story also. So I think you can inspire each other in that way, right? Did you want to...
Thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah, you touched me also, so I really do my best to not cry. But I also just wanted to say about today, like, having a Black Student Union, having an Asian Union, having a Near East Union, having a Latin Caribbean Union, it brings so much joy. Yeah. Really, it brings so much joy. And every day I'm so happy to work. I mean, it's a lot of work, it's a hell of a lot of work, but it's so joyful to finally also have space, because we're fighting for it actually so long already. And also seeing that you're not like every new Black student, I'm like directly like, come here, you know? Like, so it's so nice to, and then eventually like, to put people together, and then creativity can start. So, because that is where we study art for. We just want to make. Yeah. We want to create. And that is so nice to have this, job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
So thank you for today.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, you want to add to that, please?
Yeah, I wanted to add a couple of things. I think I wanted to really pick up on. So I wanted to sort of make a clarification about Tender Center, that it's kind of like space making is not about it's like not about feeling excluded from institutions and wanting to make your own institution. It's about trying to sort of like prefigure different modes of what doing things together might be, because I think it's really important, sort of picking up on a lot of things in Petra's presentation, that even though it's like necessary and really valuable and important and ongoing and never-ending work to kind of work within and against institutions, like they're in a kind of in a colonial capitalist system, the institutions that we have are fundamentally like white supremacist and sexist, and I don't know. And I think maybe what we needed collectively was also a space for some of this joy, and a space for pleasure, and a space for gathering energy, because... and I also just wanted to add into the question of representation very quickly. It was something that I think we try and think about practicing as a collective, is also thinking a bit about where the redistribution comes into representation, because it's kind of... so that comes through our own sort of like microeconomy, but it's also, I think like a much, much, much bigger question. And it's one, I think, I mean, speaking specifically about like the queer community, like sort of, there are huge structural and personal and social barriers from within Northern Europe to sort of like, thinking about like sort of like forms of solidarity that also go beyond like the borders of the nation state, or the kind of conglomeration of nation states in which you're living at the present.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really, or one of the things, of the many things that I will take away with today is also, yeah, this question of rhythm that you spoke about. And I actually realized when I joined Tender Center last year that I'm actually so conditioned to behave and work in this way. I run a publishing house, not a small publishing house, a publishing house in Rotterdam.
There you go.
And you know, when I joined Tender Center, I was immediately like, okay, we've got to, you know, like we need to do this, and then, you know, we have this, and it's just like this sort of step-by-step mode of thinking of how do you start something up and how do you work. And in the beginning, it was such a sort of like test of my patience almost, because I'm an extremely impatient person. It's like I'm constantly on the move, you know, like a stress addict also. And, you know, working with Tender Center, it was like every conversation we had, you know, took a couple of hours. We start off saying like how we feel, maybe something nice that happened in the day or not so nice that happened in the day, and we make our decisions. Not always, it doesn't always happen in the way that we want it to, but we make consensus-based decisions. And sometimes we fail because miscommunication and someone wasn't there. So that's also a constant work in progress. And yeah, it's just or how I experience Tender Center is like that it's so completely different from this model that we're used to and this pace that we're used to, and that it's like constantly searching and moving in form based on how we want it to behave and how we feel is fitting for the people that are involved. For the space or the energy to move forward. And it's, yeah, I find it in that sense very inspiring, and I've really learned so much from it. We had an event that Katherine organized last couple of weeks ago about collectivizing queer care. It was an event that lasted like 12 hours. We went out for a walk and visited sort of queer sites, not officially, but like ones that we maybe had personal affinities to or ideas, or we just walked around. It was a beautiful day. We came back, sat around with some tea and soup and talked, and people that wanted to leave or come back or whenever could. If you want to lie down, take a nap, do whatever, you know, like help yourselves. And later we had some screenings on which we decided like which one should we watch, and it was like, it's just so lovely. No, but like it's, and I guess I'm for the first time kind of connecting what that means or something today, because I can feel it, but it's really about changing this mindset of not, yeah, constantly consuming or repeating, you know, what we've been just programmed to do our entire lives, and, you know, like find side steps from that. So yeah, that's what I take away.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Petra, I would like to ask you something, if you can, because you mentioned it, and I'm not sure I will use the same terms, but you talk about structural misogyny. I'm not sure if you talk about misogyny, you say, or structural sexism, or sexism, yes, and I will use misogyny maybe. Can you describe it? What is the structural, like, beside that it's working inside institute, or institute that are physical, but institute that are also traditional? So if you can give it a body, because it's I'm dealing, and I would love to hear somebody that, because Me Too or harassment can happen, but they can happen because they accommodate with certain kind of codes and gatekeepers, and etc., etc. No, otherwise it was okay, 1, 2, but we know it's a system. So how you see it, how you deal with it, what could be a way first to create a certain kind of representation, to visualize it, or to be able to also to recognize it, and then to fight it. So maybe not at the tree, but at least at the beginning.
Yeah, like, Petra, can you give another lecture? No, I'm kidding.
I'm not sure if I understood the question well, or what layer of the question I should conceive of answering. For the moment, would like, and that was one of the remarks for on the study Ilse and Anissa did, was really like saying you cannot bring those two together, sexism and racism. And this was very illuminating that directors of art schools gave that opinion. They're two different things, with different mechanisms, different power relations. Yes, indeed. But it means also that they were completely ignorant with regard to intersectional thinking and methodology, and also that they wanted to face things. So let's first talk about sexism, and then in 10 years maybe we can talk about racism. So there is a huge, again, I always think in what are the strategies to keep the system going, and power strategies, and I really see that as one of the power strategies. So I'm reluctant to pull all these things apart and just saying what is now here the institutional or structural or systemic sexism in this organization, because I consider myself a feminist, and I take it as a badge of honor. Yet at the same time, I am very much aware of the violent history of feminism, and the sexism is not necessarily only, but statistically it is, something where men are the only perpetrators if you look from an intersectional. So it's a patriarchal structural system, sexism.
We're all implicated. Right?
Yes, and I do think that contemporary Europe, contemporary proto-fascist, neo-nationalist Europe, as you said, with the units of the starting unit, the nation state, is a very problematic space with regard to feminism. I mean, feminism is also that today recuperated as a racist strategy. And so if we talk about structural sexism, we have to be very careful, because it can also be, combating structural sexism can also be a way of installing and perpetrating racism in institutions through the bias of now more predominantly Islamophobia. But to come to the question about where is structural sexism and how to combat it, I still believe, and I know it's like the glass ceiling idea, I still believe in quota, because I just don't believe by putting one person in power of an organization, as we often see, your body is molded to the organizational volumes. You can have a woman on top of an organization which is still a sexist organization, because the system reproduces itself. It attracts a specific kind of personalities with specific skills, people who like to flatter power, etc., etc. So it's we have to dare to say that also. So I do believe in quota on all levels, not only in the student body, but definitely up, but also on all levels. And when we talk about power and women, and I do think we have to bring in the class dimension, and also with regard to sexism, we do forget about the class dimension. So if you're breaking the glass ceiling, who is sweeping up the glass after you have broken it, and who was building the glass ceiling? So, I mean, I think those two things, those who have built the ceiling and those who are sweeping up after you break it, are very important things to take along when you talk about institutional sexism, because women who occupy positions of power or who are climbing the ladder do it at the detriment, again, of women, of other women of color, mostly in our art institutions, who literally are cleaning up after repassing, teaching, etc. So this is also sexism, institutional sexism. So it goes from rape culture, which to harassment, to who is sweeping up after we have left our paint and our books, etc. So, but yeah, we could.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you very much. I think it's strong and.
Yeah, no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, just to thank you, because I think it's kind of, you at least give a mirror of something that we can look at. You know, when we talk of mix or we look at patterns, So you can give it a board. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, really rich material to keep reflecting on it. Just one element that you mentioned also on the quota issue. I mean, I've had phone calls from different organizations saying, can you come on board with us in the board, for instance, yeah, many years ago, the COC, for instance. And I said, well, I'm not going to do that, obviously, because, yeah, it's a white, so very, very white, very, very, at that time, at least, racist organization. And I'm the one who's going to drown is me, right? So it's a radical act of self-care to say no also to those organizations. And you need so much more than that. But in a way, it's also something that you have to learn. Oh, Petra wants to... and people in the room as well. Okay, hands. No, okay, great. Just what? Yeah, no, tiny bit, and then I'll come to you, please.
Just, I really like to make a distinction between tokenism and quota.
Yeah.
That's why it's for me so important. One person, it's violent. I mean, quota. When I talk about quota, I talk about 50%.
Yeah, of
people
course.
of color.
Yeah.
I mean, there is
But
a lot of reparation to be done, and
Yeah.
I mean, we're not. So it doesn't work by putting the weight on people's shoulders.
Yeah.
It's violent.
In a way, it also shows the die. Oh, you have the mic.
Yeah,
What are you doing giving her the mic?
Thank you.
And you can hold
No,
it.
No,
yeah,
you can
I know.
hold
I can hold it. I feel very special. Hi, I'm
What's
Nicole.
your name? Yeah, okay.
And I'm from South Africa. I thought maybe that will be interesting to add to this kind of discussion that I'm going to add to. In the beginning of your speech, Petra, or your lecture, you made it very important to say what position you're talking from. And you said, especially for you, it is very important to name this. And I think from the perspective and the research that you're doing, it is very important because you actually use that within your research. Whereas with a lot of writers, and even some feminist writers, they use it as a cop-out to show that they are white women talking from a certain class perspective, but by mentioning that, they don't have to mention that anywhere again in their research. And that comes back to the discussion you just had about institutional sexism and racism. I feel like mentioning what your class and your status and where you're coming from is not enough. And even though it needs to be mentioned, and like you said, you do know that you're coming from at this moment, middle-class, white privileged perspective, whereas like I'm from South Africa, I come from a very precarious part from South Africa, but I do come from just after apartheid ended. So I come with a load of power attached to that. But that doesn't change the fact where I've born or where I've raised in and what kind of opportunities I've had in life. But by saying that, that doesn't mean anything. So within your research, like I said, you can see it having an effect throughout everything you're doing. But how do you incorporate, and this is maybe a way too loaded question and more a question that everybody can take home with them, how do you incorporate your position that you're writing from that actually stands in solidarity or helps or works towards solidarity or open up the dialogue? Because just mentioning it is not enough. And like I said, a lot of people, a lot of writers, and a lot of writers in the past, and even contemporary writers, really do use it as a cop-out to not need to, because they've checked that box, they don't have to talk about it again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a very important question, and really I slipped over it in the sense that I see it as a strategy to say it, and not as going, I'm coming from a Roman Catholic background, not going to church, getting the communion, and being, or going to confess, and then having, you can say everything after you have just said, I'm white. So it's very often used as a way of going to the communion or going to confession, and which is again very violent. When I say I use it as a strategy, I want to not only myself say it, I want others to think also about what their situation is from where they're speaking. The speaker, a few speakers after me, the dean of the university, still here, yeah, mentioned afterwards, I'm coming from a feminist family, my mother had a company, her mother had a company, her mother had a company. There you hear a class situation. I also mention it because I think class is very much skipped over in a lot of our conversations. And I do think class is still very important in this kind of, especially in an art background. When I see a man coming from working class, if they exhibit certain behaviors, like being rebellious and behaving what we call trashy, that's very much heralded and applauded. When women do it, it is also if it is sexually, with a sexual undertone. So, I mean, there are classism and there are class barriers in art, and there are codes of behavior that go with it. And there's class also in who has access to art education. I'm questioning, for instance, the program I have in my art school, because the access is 2,400 euros a year for everybody to pay. It's an advanced master. But people who come from non-European countries have to prove that they have 7,000 on their account. In the Netherlands, you even have to prove 15,000 on your account from a non-European background. I mean, this is never told, it's never put open, it's never problematized. It is to do with nation state and with protective Europe. So what I'm saying here is it's important to spell out where you come from, for the other also to think where I am. And it's important to constantly be aware of our blind spots in what we're saying. Now, the second part of the question, what do? I don't feel like here giving a list of the things I do. I mean, as you saw in those things, what was on the slides, I try to work in all these domains. And I try to engage in the limits of my energy. Thank you.
Thanks. I have a question here.
Hi, my name is Joanna. I'm Portuguese, but I'm also part of the Rotterdam community. I live there. My question is for Delphine. You were saying how the Netherlands is not equipped to have a modern Me Too movement. When I think about Rotterdam, I can think about, at least on the top of my head, 3 or 4 men who are well known in the creative and artistic community that engage in sexual harassment, coercion, things that are against the law but are shielded with the whole thing that also Petra talked about. This is a liberal, progressive mean. This is art. Where does art come and the man stops? Yada, yada, yada. I know these men. I see these men and the men who shield them and the women that shield them. But I can't accept that they keep doing it. So how do we make this happen? Because these men keep coming, they keep doing it. Even the women to whom they do this to are in complete denial that this happens. They keep being invited for panels. They keep being in magazines. So I want to know where to start. Because, I mean, they can't just get away with this. And then in 20 years we talk about it. It needs to happen now. So in your opinion, what would make this place, you know, I'm not saying mimicking the American movement or something like that, but where we can come forward and put these men on the spotlight?
Great question. Who wants to address?
Well, she addressed it to me. Yeah. This is what one of the reasons that it was so important to have engagement, for instance, with us today, because they started this work in Belgium, or to have the example of Agnès Salle implementing this Eilat desk with the strengths and limitation that it has, that every institution has to implement these policies, that you have a place for reporting. So, I mean, it's a collective effort. It's that. I think, again, engagement has more experience of trying to implement this, but I would say from my own perspective, it's a collective effort. Speaking up is traumatizing. So, you know, what are the conditions that you can do that we can collectively create these conditions? Maybe bridging with your organization to see how you've done this, or inviting, I don't know. So that could be definitely a conversation. I mean, I would be happy to engage, or that we meet, or we bring different people interested to see how we could address this. Are there more people in the room working on this?
Yeah, maybe you can raise your hand for those who think they can help out. Okay, great.
Is it
Then
Michelle,
that's good.
Sarah?
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So try to connect. This is also what the drinks are for. Like, are there issues you want to raise now and you want to connect people with during the reception that you think, is there a topic that you're thinking of that, hey, I want to speak to people about that? Yeah, okay.
I'm curious because you say you're working on a policy for the Sunbear. Do you know of any school who have implemented these policies and that they are actually working?
And also wanted to add, like, back to the financial, we are also searching for the unions for funds to tackle the problem of the non-EU students, because we can talk about diversity, but then it also has to be way easier for non-EU students to come and access the academy. So even with the bottle later, if you have advice, or please come.
Did you want to?
No, but I feel I want to continue to answer to your question
please,
quickly.
Exactly.
Because how many artists are in the room, or writers, artists in a broad sense, writers, creators, musicians?
Raise your hands.
Raise your hands. You know, so this is our tool, this is our language, this is also the place and the forms, and that's why it was also very important to have youth at the center, because I want to talk about art and hospitality, that the institutions are not hospitable for different understanding of art and practices that are very fragile, very vulnerable. And looking at the legacy of women artists, this is what was striking, is like this archive are never saved unless the artists made themselves the effort to donate this archive to some institutions. And so it's very hard to trace back these steps, because I'm interested in publishing, so they were publishing ephemera, flyers, posters, things that were not deemed artistic practices, that were not deemed savings, that were not deemed attention. And I'm only talking about publishing, but we could talk about performances, spoken words, a lot of things that had a different kind of materiality. So how do we preserve the materiality of feminist legacies? I think it's a crucial question. And so art is also the place and the form. So we end up creating these spaces where we can express this versatile immaterial, or with different practices, and that we need to cherish and bring forward, and maybe take the responsibility to archive ourselves and rescue and transmit, which came earlier also through the day.
Yeah. Which I think is a great idea. There's someone here who wants to say something.
Hello, my name is Kim. I come from Northeast Germany, which is a kind of very wide right-wing moving area in Germany with not so much population as here. And I'm a music student in this conservatory, and I was wondering if there is anyone in the audience who is also engaged in music practice, because I have the feeling, no, it's a fact, it's also really white conservatory, and we only have white male main subject docents for instrumentalists. And I am trying to figure out a way what to do, how to, I don't know, connect with other people and find a way of communicating about it, because the conservatory doesn't do it and there's no space for it. And I don't really know how to find the crack, where and how to do it. And I keep talking about it with people, but I don't really have the feeling yet something is going on. So if there's anybody who can help.
Anyone in music? Raise your hands who wants to maybe? Yeah, okay, great. I should connect you to my nephew. So I was, a week ago, he's in one of the conservatories in the Netherlands, and he always wants to chat with me about, these things. And then he was just mentioning 3 instances in his conservatory with teachers involved, and it was one big jaw drop, like shocking to hear what was going on in his school. Extremely racist, extremely sexist, and I was like, immediately looking up the names of the teachers involved, and I was like, oh, you know, I need to call out these people. And he was like, but no one says something because they all want to graduate. And so this is also a power thing, right? Like that shuts them up. And I was really, really shocked to just, you know, it was almost casual conversation, and yet he was saying something like, oh, we should start a black book, you know, and I'm always about naming and shaming, but sometimes you shouldn't, strategically speaking, right away. But yeah, I think, thank you for saying that, and yeah, we'll look each other up also. But yeah, so it's there. Okay. I think we need to wrap up because it's after 5, and I promised you your drinks and your breathing time and everything, right? Which means that we also, Delphine, what's next? Because you've with your core group, you've done an amazing job in pulling this together. Amazing speakers, and so much material, food for thought, stuff to churn on many different levels. It also means that should have an ongoing conversation. So I think one practical thing is, think about people here in the room, you all have interesting positions, in different places. Think about if you want to host a next conversation on this, which is a bit bigger than just, you know, sitting around the table with a couple of folks, which is also important, by the way, or doing a really nice walk. Think about that if you want to do that. And this should be like a roadshow, right? This should happen in many different cities and places around the Netherlands, because this is a conversation we need to continue. Hidde, I see you nodding also like, yeah, maybe. The other thing you're talking about is the consortium, like a community of, a coalition of the willing, so to speak, that is not just a coalition of the willing, but also a coalition that is willing to do the work in ways that move ahead. Could you speak a little bit on that, maybe?
Well, in the description, I called it the group an informal strategic coalition, in the sense that we don't have an official structure. We're not a stichting, we're not a foundation, we're not a BV, we're not a company. Which is just people who connect on different dots or different point of different intersection. And also, it's not only, as we see today, located in one place. You brought the last point was what important is speaking up versus anonymity. Like engagement is anonymous, la part des femmes is anonymous, sub du jour is anonymous. So anonymous strategies are still today one of the conditions often that you can do this work. So here we come showing our face, speaking up in our name, which is also a responsibility that you take. So many people run the organization here and invited you and announced different events. So join these events, support these events. We should maybe set up a calendar. We were talking with Plum, the designer, to possibly put a website together, but of course we, at this point, don't have funds for all this work. So we want to continue this work also without the exhaustion of doing this. So we haven't set, we meet on a monthly basis so far, once a month. So the work group is open for people who would like to join, but by joining, that means you also commit yourself to somehow show up and, and engage. Do I have more concrete proposition? I think we should do maybe a quick round.
Yeah, we can. Yeah. Think about think about that, and maybe also think about as we are sitting here, we are a coalition of the willing. If it's a very politically capitalist term, maybe, but still, we are already in the know or wanting to know, curious to know more, do more. But how to reach the people that are not converted yet, how to reach those who are yeah, not in the know. Or
the podcast will be online. Share it abundantly. That would be one possibility.
Okay. I kind of think it needs more than just a podcast, but podcast is a good start. I love podcasts, by the way. Okay, let's go and do a round for
invitation for the next steps to do.
What would be okay? The question is, in rounding up, what would be a thing that you think is something that you could do or would like to advocate that will be done, not necessarily by you? What would be that thing? And it can be very extremely concrete, but it can also be very abstract. It's really up to you. Think about it.
Abstract concretion or concrete abstraction, I would say don't be an ally.
Here's the philosopher.
Don't be an ally, be complicit. I think that's an important one. But what this means, being complicit, is look in the mirror in the morning, know what your lines of oppression are, but also know what your lines of oppressing are. And where you are oppressing, you can use these privileges to be complicit. Put yourself at stake. I would say put your body at stake. That's the only way that we will move forward. If you wake up in the morning and look into the mirror, what we often do, ask for who am I, the Dutch word is hefboom, leverage.
Leverage, yeah.
For who am I leveraging? We all give value to people, and by giving value to them, they give value back to us. It's like, we are all pumping up each other balloon. Which balloons are you pumping up? And I think this goes from very concrete things. Where do I buy? Who do I recruit? About whose work do I write? Who do I invent in my exhibition? What students am I teaching? And etc., etc. Who are you giving value? And by giving value, you always get a bit of their value. So you always like to give value to those who have already value. You have to break that circle. So my concrete action.
2 mics now.
Yeah. Let's amplify.
Whoa. No, I cannot be this precise and concrete. So the only thing that I would take with me for today is to connect with people, even though when you're scared or when you think like, do it.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. Yes, Katherine.
I think I would just like to spin some words onto Petra's very good advice, which is to, I was thinking about, when you were talking, I was thinking about what happens if you replace the word value with energy. And I think also like energy is not an infinite resource that we have. We can often make more, and often in feminist practice or anti-racist practice, you find energy where there seems to be none, and you just get a little bit more. But it's just like also maybe just let's not use so much energy in the first place on the things that aren't building more energy for this what did we call it? A coalition and for this collectivity. And I also was thinking a lot this afternoon about language and the idea, like how the word autonomous exists in English in the Netherlands because of the sort of weight of the word autonomy in the arts in Dutch, and how I just wanted to also maybe this is a sort of experiment and on a sort of daily practice for myself is like what happens when what is it really to, which is another way of framing what you just said, is like what is it to really think about what you do in terms of the fact that knowing that every single one of us is interdependent on every single other one of us, and the language of autonomy is a lie, and any autonomy I have is based on the oppression of someone else, or like the lack of autonomy of someone else. So I think, so maybe just to that it's that. Just to, if you find hers difficult, just change the words and see what happens.
Okay. Thanks.
Mine is very concrete. I'm with a friend starting a queer choir in Rotterdam that will be hosted by Tender Center. So if you cringe by hearing your own voice and you'd like to learn to embrace that vulnerability with us, yeah, come to me. Be welcome.
Oh, I'm letting my nephew know. He might. Nice. Galit.
Yeah, maybe 3 things. Advice to myself, I think, mainly. I use, as a curator, it's used to say like independent. It's written like interdependent. It's like very important for me to be in, it sounds funny, like, I'm over 50. So yes, you talk about interdependent. I'm working with artists, I'm working with institutes, so it's very important for me to say that I'm working with. I'm not working by myself as a curator. If I do some curatorial work. And other things like the question about what to do with a raster, or I think don't go to any fight if you don't have enough agency. Super important to have agency, to know where you are, who support you, where you balance yourself, not to burn out, because it's happened a lot in activism with a lot of energy and not enough agency. Mm-hmm. And the one that want to fight I would say, the men that run the show, maybe slowly we need to think how to do it. How to do it. To start to think how, to tackle how to take down the men that run the show. And it's not just one, okay? It's the...
Okay.
Yeah, it starts with you, it starts with me, it starts with ourselves and how we put this constellation together. So I really thank you all for being here today, for wanting to join this conversation. I thank all the amazing speakers we had today. I think Studio General, Katherine, and the school for putting the financial resources, also for making this day possible, and our team. And yeah, I think it's a special day.
Nice. Woo! Thank you. Oh my God, you're gonna...
Thank you, Nancy, for leading the day.
Yeah, give them a big hand, the organizers, because they need it.
Come,
Yes.
Katherine,
Standing ovation for you.
Luc, Victor, please all come here.
Katherine, here we are again. I'm calling you one last time. We just listened to the closing panel of the conference, actually. A new roadmap. But we're not there yet, are we?
Well, yes, you're right. A lot of work is to be done. And one thing that we have learned is patience is history, as well as good intentions. It's really high time to collect and spread data and to make unheard voices heard. So maybe get back to Nancy Jouwe, who so beautifully put at the end of her keynote it's really a collective effort. It's all of us. We have to share our knowledge and experiences, and really it doesn't stop at a conference. And we as a work group will of course continue the work. We really hope to stimulate a consortium to be built for collecting data, and of course we hope to organize more events. We are talking with Van Appen Museum at the moment to organize an event in the fall. We're in contact with Platform BK, who's interested in the roadmap work group. And we will definitely organize an event to go deeper into art education by the end of the year. And we really do hope that all of these efforts will do together with other art institutes and individuals. And brings me to a very important thing, that if there are listeners that want to join our effort, please make yourself known to us. I guess that in the show notes you can find our contact address, and we really hope that people will make themselves known.
I will make it so that they are in the show notes. Because we all need to be complicit, right?
Really, really true. Petra van Brabandt said to us, don't be an ally, be complicit.
So, if you do want to get complicit, get in touch. Check the show notes or the Studium Generale website. And that was it. Our series on equality in the arts, at least for now. It was produced by me, Dennis Gaans, for Studium Generale Artes. And of course it was edited and co-hosted by Katherine de Munk. We plan to release our next regular episode in a month or so, but anything can happen, so keep an eye on this feed. Thanks for listening. You're already an ally. Now get complicit.